He succeeded. His grade on the final examination, which the professor did think was my favorite, was a 3.8. With the 0.2 that I had been awarded, that would have amounted to the 4.0 in the class. However, I earned, I'm pleased to say, a very honest 3.7 on the exam, which together with my 0.2 gave me the high grade in the class of 3.9. That is, deliberate falsification of style can in fact influence the nature of the data. I can't really deal with that today, but I want to tell you that I have remembered that and will remember that until my dying day. I have a great admiration for Andy. I think it's extremely clever, extremely well done. But let me move on here to two other cases that I want to get in before my time is up. In one case recently, I was asked to compare videotape samples of a defendant's voice with audio recordings of telephone calls ostensibly made by someone else. The defendant, as he eventually confessed, had faked his own death by murdering a friend by setting his auto on fire with a friend inside it. Then he had telephoned family members pretending to be a lawyer representing the dead himself. Okay? Family members on about call number 2 or 3 recognized his voice and called the police. What I realized as soon as I was involved in this case was that the defense counsel was asking me to prove that his client was guilty. I called him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Look, I know he's guilty. We've got to convince him to make a guilty plea, or he's going to get the death penalty, and we're going to spend, $6 million." A psychologist also prepared a detailed report in that case. I prepared one, and in fact, the defendant eventually did plea, and in fact is in prison. One other case, I'm almost out of time here. Going over in North Carolina a few years ago, the situation involved a murder case, although the body still has not been found. The issue was the authorship of a putative flight note. The wife had written a 3-page handwritten note trying to reconcile with her very jealous husband and confessing past infidelity. The 3-page note ends abruptly, and then across the room we found a 1/4-page typed note which says in effect, "Oh, no, I've changed my mind after all. My lover is here and I'm going to leave with him. Goodbye." The question was, who wrote the typed note? Does it stylistically match? This is what you have on your handout, by the way. What you have on your handout is the first 90 or so words of the handwritten note, the last 90 or so words of the handwritten note, and the entirety of the typed note. Now, we don't have time really for you to do some analysis and tell me what you find there, so let me very briefly summarize here. Is this appropriate data? Well, both the texts address the topic of past infidelity and either a desire to reconcile or announcement of flight. The target audience is a jealous husband, and the residence is the location is the residence of the victim and that jealous husband. Is there enough data here to reach valid conclusions? Well, you tell me. The handwritten note contains over 1,200 words, 40 sentences as punctuated, with an average sentence length in words of 30. The typed text is about 90 or 91 words, 5 sentences as punctuated, average sentence length 18 words. There's more. The verb phrases used in the handwritten note often contain auxiliary verbs, should, have, or contractions of those, while those in the typed note never do. The ratio of different words to total words is quite different also. In the handwritten note is 4.3 and the typed note is 1.4. One possible conclusion is that there's some indications of different authorship and little linguistic evidence of common authorship. Some superficial similarities between the documents exist. They could easily have been achieved by copying the spelling, for instance. There are differences in spelling, diction, vocabulary, and grammar. But another possible conclusion, of course, is that there is insufficient data to reach a conclusion based on linguistic evidence. I concluded the former. And again, in this particular case, I can testify, my report was used to help persuade the defendant to confess and enter a guilty plea. Now, the questions that I have tried to address here are these. How do we conduct ourselves as linguists in cases where linguistics evidence is some evidence, but not clearly dispositive, at least according to Albert in Rule 702? Second, should linguists restrict their participation, particularly in criminal cases, where the analysis merely suggests conclusions? Or should we, in some way, restrict our participation to non-testimonial functions? And what I think is true is that we should, first of all, be very candid with attorneys about the extent to which we're going to have to give probabilistic answers, we should probably seek to restrict our participation, particularly in criminal cases. But we should make it very clear, I think, to attorneys and occasionally judges that the kind of analysis we can offer, even based on insufficient data, is a very useful discovery technique. And that, I think, is where I want to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. I found that fascinating, and you were quite correct. You can speak very rapidly and very clearly. Questions from the audience?
Comments. You've had experiences with these things, I know.
I have a technical one.
Yes, sir.
Why would the judge and both parties agree to be bound by whatever it was you said? That's what you said about the second
That was
slide.
the very first case, and I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I was told before I completed my research that that, in fact, was the situation. It's a very interesting situation because that's also a case in which, as a court-appointed, state-appointed expert, I was told I would be paid, I think, $400 for my work. I never got a check, and about a year later, I got a call from the lawyer, and he said, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you something. We only pay in Tennessee when the suspect is convicted. I hope that would not have influenced my conclusion.
It should have influenced your submission. Any questions for Bethany? Yeah, Rob.
You've never really tried. So you've never really been involved in a case where you tried to use some of Carol Chastie's methodology.
That's
sort of
correct.
thing?
I have not. Have you done that?
No, I try to steer away from these cases for the very reasons that you enunciated. But I wondered if could you just maybe say a little bit more about what you feel about Chastie's arguments?
Intuitively, where there's a large body of data, I suspect that Chastie has identified the two most important features, but I don't think the other features are unimportant and should be ignored, partly on the basis on... I'll give you one other example very quickly, a criminal case I did not discuss, a very early one. Again, I did a transcript. I prepared a script that avoids exemplar and compared the pronunciations of words primarily because what stood out almost immediately after I compared the two samples is that there were several words consistently pronounced differently by the two speakers and one morphological pattern consistently different. The word Y-E-L-L-O-W on the tape was consistently yaller. In the voice of the defendant suspect, it was yellow. The other thing is that the ing suffix in the surreptitiously made tape was always in, and it was always ing in the suspect's case. Now, those can be fake, obviously. The average age of the criminal suspects defendants that I have worked with in these surreptitiously made tape recording situations is 18. They don't have PhDs in linguistics or anything near it, and I really don't think that deliberate falsification of those kinds of features is going on in these situations. I can't prove that, however. John.
Based on the 702 rules of evidence that you cited, is it possible that one's linguistic experience in different regions of the country would actually affect your relative status as an expert on local dialects?
It's a great question. I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, when I first planned this paper, I wanted to work more with the southern features. 20 minutes is simply not long enough to go into that. That's another paper, but you're absolutely right. Of course it does. And I should not testify in cases in New Hampshire, for instance. I know the southern features. I can work with the southern features. I know what to look for when I start looking. I think you're right.
Thank you very much, Beth.
Thank you.